Most of you know Mr. Yep. He is a new iconographer, a new local iconographer. He comes from Peru originally, moved to the States, studied graphic design in California, and then had a successful career in that industry, in technology, in the Silicon Valley area, working on companies that we all have heard of. Cool ones like DocuSign, Christian ones like Bible Gateway. He was up amongst the ranks, and then he chose to start with Hallow. I was thinking my father-in-law made a good joke, recommended a good joke that he started working for Hollow and finding that empty, he decided on a new career, but it's recorded, so I guess I said the joke anyway, it doesn't matter. So he was the senior project manager there, and of course, the goal of that company was putting Christianity before people who otherwise would not see it, would not hear it. And Kai had, along the way, a realization of doing this in a tangible and real manner, and in a mode that was not available to him in the digital space. He started taking courses, classes in theology, in sacred art. He started to study with really one of the world's greatest iconographers, George Cordes, who is in Greece. It was Zoom back and forth. They do still. He's a great mentor to him through this process. And I dare say that Mr. Cordes has had few pupils as talented as Kai. For him to go this far in such a short period is staggering. So this, being his first major commission, has proven that he is amongst the greats here in the Western world already. And so it is a dazzle and a joy that we have him locally, that he gets to be our friend here and that we get to learn from him. And so with further ado, I invite him up so that we can do so now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's just so fun. It's so good. It's so good to be surrounded by friends. I had a whole slide when I was going to introduce myself, and Jacob just did the whole thing. So you can see that I have that some of my background, so you can understand where I'm coming from. So thank you, Jacob, for doing that. I just wanted to mention again George Cordes, who's my current teacher, because he's been so influential in the way I understand what icons are. And I'm going to mention him probably a couple times. And as I was diving into the world of iconography, I was trying to find who do I learn this from? I went online and talked to several people, and you hear so much about iconography. A lot of ideas that are interesting, sometimes puzzling. They say, you need to do this number of things for this to be an authentic icon. You need to fast 40 days. I was starting okay, well, maybe I need to fast more, but is that essential? And then other people will say, if it's not painted this way or with these materials, or if it doesn't have this detail, it's not an icon. So as I wrestled with this and kept reading and studying, I also felt that I needed to be educated in the Catholic tradition. So I started my master's in sacred arts. And so I'm navigating these two worlds. What I'm going to present, other than the work of 6 months, this is a commission from Roman Catholic Church in Iowa. And they wanted to have a new Station of the Cross in the iconographic tradition. So they reached out to me, and I worked in this since September. And this is the product of it. And I find it a very interesting blend of Western devotion and, let's say, Eastern, although it's not exclusively Eastern, tradition. So what I'm going to present now is my thoughts around what an icon is. It might seem too basic, but if you dive into some corners of the internet, you will find that there's a lot of discussion about it and a lot of disagreement also, as I said in some of the examples. So, let me see. Yeah. Let me start by saying that for me, icons have been really important in my spiritual upbringing. So this quote from St. John of Damascus paints a good picture of my experience. I have seen the human face of God and my soul is saved. There's been important moments in my spiritual journey where meditating and praying with an icon of Christ was so illuminating. One of them was when I discerned through marriage, when I was in religious life. The other one was when I decided to quit my job and start painting icons. I was looking up at the dome of a church in Athens, painted by my teacher. I was all alone. It was after Vespers, it was so dark, and I just looked up and I saw the face of Christ, and it was just a certainty somehow. So, but with that, like, I kept wrestling with the question, what is an icon? People say that, we mean different things. What I found very interesting is, as you read what the church has said, especially for the first 12 centuries, whenever the church says the image, the icon, which means image, right? They don't refer specifically to what we probably understand as like the Byzantine. The church typically refers to the image of Christ in general. We just don't do that. We don't use the word icon in that way, but I found it very interesting. So let me walk you through some images to see how we perceive them, if our idea of icon matches, right? So as I said, like, the word icon comes from image in Greek. I know etymology, or the origin of the words, is not sufficient to explain what they mean. It gives us something, but it seems to me that the church uses it very broadly, and we don't. So we sometimes load the term with certain meaning. So many times when we think of icons, it might look something like this. This is something we would say is a typical icon. This is an icon from the monastery of Mount Athos, so what gets more legit, let's say, than that, right? You see the background, you see it looks cold, and this position, he's blessing us, he seems emotionally a little distant with the motif and the patterns of the enthroned Christ. Let me show you another one. You will see that and say, well, yeah, that's an icon. It's on the dome of the baptistry in Florence. And it's not that early, it's 1300s, right? So this is Western art. This is an image of the West as well. And it is clearly an icon. We don't think about it. For over 1,000 years, saying icon didn't mean Byzantine. It meant the image of the church. What's happened? Right? That's a good question. Oops, right? Let's look at this one. This one is a manuscript. It's called the Steinheim Missal. It was made in Germany. It's the 12th century. And the Getty Museum published a whole book on this, and I found it fascinating. Every page is described and all that. The style is different, the colors are different, the medium is different. It's parchment, it's a manuscript with illuminations, but is it an icon? Absolutely. Probably a lot of people, even in my circles, iconographers, would look at it, well, it's too Western. It's an icon, Now let's push it a little. What is that? Maybe some of you might recognize it. It is the Book of Kells. It's the Gospel book from Scotland, and this is much earlier, even 9th century. The style, the lines, the color, the motifs are not more distant from, let's say, the Byzantine, but it is the iconography of the church. That is an icon. You might feel like it's too different, right? So then why is an icon? I keep wrestling with that. I'm going to push it a little bit more. I hope you can see well, but that is the Ghent altarpiece, extremely famous, really, especially if you think about the image at the bottom that is used for so much in Western publications by Van Eyck. This is considered one of the first masterpieces done in oil, and you already see a lot of difference. There's a lot of difference with the iconographic pieces that I show, but there's a lot of similarities as well. Like you see The motif of the enthroned Christ with the Mother of God and St. John is called the Daisies, and they're there. They have their names. Christ is in this frontal position, in the hieratic mode, like distant, emotionally distant. You have what looks like an iconostasis that we have in the East, but there's a lot of innovation. You have cast shadows, a lot more volume and subtlety in the transitions of colors and volume. You have the introduction of much more explicit nudity. You see Adam and Eve. You have depth. So there's a lot of innovation, but I don't think I would say it's properly an icon in the sense that we need it, but I'm pretty sure it functions like one. So what do we do with that? You know, it is a liturgical piece. It was used pretty much in the same way that icon was used. Well, then we get later in time something like this. This is a very famous French painter of the early 1900s. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's Tissot. You might have seen some of his paintings in Bible illustrations, or he was praised to be a very photorealistic painter, even though he had a treatment of, say, the backgrounds like the Impressionists would do. Think of Van Gogh and Starry Night and how the brushstrokes are very clear. But even with that, he achieved this photorealism. I mean, I think nobody would say, "Oh, that clearly is an icon." That's not. But then why? What makes it not an icon? I'm gonna finish this rapid fire images with these ones. These are icons by Father Stamatis Skridis. He's a Greek Orthodox iconographer. He is, I think, based in Georgia now. And of course, he is pushing, let's say, right? He is in circles of the Orthodox world, highly controversial. And some other ones, I think this kind of experimentation is much better received in Europe than in the United States, but he started exploring color a lot more. He comes from the fine arts, and also the rendering of the forms is more like naive. When you see his whole program, he's painted entire churches in this style. I think there's a moment when you go, oh, I think I see what he's trying to do. Now, I don't know what you guys would think about this, but it is challenging, that's why I'm using it, because is this an icon? So I'm just gonna present 4 things that I found out make that. I don't want to be pretentious saying this is the dogmatic teaching of or this or that. But there's elements that, as I study, have proven to be accidental and some more essential. And I think I'm doing this because the church needs iconography. And I find that for many iconographers and many Catholics, Orthodox, we might be in a moment where we don't know what that means. And I think we need our own mode of expressing the beauty and the mysteries visually, but we need to understand what we're doing. The first one is the likeness of the figure, then the name of the figure. These two are related. Then is the liturgical function, and the fourth is the proper mode of rendition. And I'm going to spend the most time in the last one, because it's the most abstract and the most challenging, I think. So, but first I'm going to focus on the first two. Out of all the things that I hear about what icons are, and I appreciate what my teacher, George Cordes, does. He's Greek Orthodox. In our classes, we have Christians, and a couple of non-Christians from different denominations, but he goes back to what the unified tradition of the church has said. That means he goes back to the Seventh Ecumenical Council. It's interesting because it seems on the one hand that the church has said a lot more than we think about images, or iconography. And also a lot less, because it hasn't authoritatively said, like, this is the style of the church. On the first side, what has the church said? And another surprising thing for a lot of people, and it was for me at least, is that highest authority, let's say, especially in the Orthodox Church, of teaching of the church is a council. And there was one entirely about icons. You know, if you think about the sacred arts, you have architecture, vestments, sacred music. None of them had an ecumenical council. This one did, right? And why? Because the iconoclasm was understood as the summary of all heresies, and the triumph of veneration of icons was considered the triumph of orthodoxy, the triumph of the truth of the incarnation that then allows us to portray the face of Christ and venerate him through the image that we're painting. And we celebrate that in the Eastern Church on the first Sunday of Lent as the triumph of orthodoxy to this day. As part of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, and this is something George has expressed to us that in the proceedings of the council, the definition of the icon came to be expressed, even though it doesn't appear in the canons. Now, I tried to find the document, it's all in Greek, and I'm like, okay, damn, I don't speak Greek. There's one in Latin, I also don't speak Latin. But to make things a little clearer, we have the Saint Theodore the student, who helped clarify and teach what the church had to proclaim about iconography. Along with him, we have St. John of Damascus, who was prior to the council, and they are the most commonly used, let's say, teachers. Use is not right, but quoted, let's say, for the teaching of icons. St. Theodore is the one who distills the essence of the icon to two things: the likeness and the name of the figure of the painter. Without that, you don't have properly the image of this saint or that. And it's actually, the more I read, the more simple it becomes. Like if I tell you, I'm going to paint an image of your mom, but I paint another woman, paint my mom, you will look at it and say, like, well, that's not right. Even if I wrote her, you know, that's just not that work. How can I relate to my mother through this image that is a different person? So St. Peter is basically saying the relationship between the icon and the prototype is the likeness, right? The hypostatic form of sharing both. So we need to preserve the likeness of the figure for it to be a true reality. Okay, it might sound very simple, but we've had in history moments where that likeness has been lost, where, for example, in the Renaissance, unfortunately, the image of the saints was used not by tradition, but by human models. So I would paint a friend of mine and make him look like St. Peter. But then that tradition that we received, how Peter looked, how he has always been represented, started being lost, let alone writing his name. So there was a lot missed there. Right? So it stops being an icon. When you lose the face of the saint, of Christ and the saints, we have some paintings in the Renaissance, as beautiful technically as they could be, where Christ just does not look like Christ anymore. It looks like the guy down the street that was used as a model. So these first two are extremely essential. Without these two, no way. You don't have an icon regardless of the style. It needs to appear, you have to have the likeness of the figure. The name, there's a whole theology of the name that I won't get to, but even in icons that are pretty complex, sometimes you do away with names when you have a crowd, for example, when it's pretty clear who that is by the context. So, you know, there's that. But for the sake of clarity, for the sake of the Christian who venerates the image, to know who they are encountering, the likeness of whom we write the name. The third, admittedly, is something that I need to think more about, the church to function of the icon. And I say that because most of my work is done in negative, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's extremely important, because the icon is not simply an art piece that has a religious theme. It does something. It's in a sense, it's a necessary part of the liturgy in regular circumstances, right? In the Eastern Church, we need some even foldable icons of Christ and the Lamb of God to be present in the divine liturgy. And the canons of the Seventh Ecumenical Council do have the language. So they say something like the veneration that we, as Christians, we give to the gospel is similar to the one we give to icons or to the Holy Cross. So it's high up there. It's not accidental in a normal circumstance. But it's not only there to just be like a nice piece of art that we look at. It's what is it doing? It is bringing forth the presence of somebody. It is communing with the person we're engaging with. It does bring it forth in the likeness, not in its nature, and that's a whole conversation about the confusion that was generated before that actually triggered the iconoclast. The presence of the figure depicted is in the liturgy, and we can interact with it. Another way in which sometimes icons are downplayed, I would say, is in that unfortunately it has been, as far as I understand, a trend in Western thought since St. Augustine of referring to imagery as something lesser than text instead of respecting the medium, right? It's like, this is what people who don't know how to read need to use to understand mysteries, right? That implies that if people knew how to read, which most of us now in the Western world know to a degree, we wouldn't need images. And lo and behold, now there's a lot of churches with no images, even though the church has proclaimed the necessity of them. The medium of the image is not simply a way to a lower level of understanding when you don't have the medium of the text. In itself, it is doing something different. And as I said, it's communion. The fourth one, and this is what I want to share the most, is the proper mode of rendering the icon. Because you can say, like, out of these three, I mean, maybe we have some of that in the Renaissance as well. As beautiful as some of the pieces are, when you read, for example, Pope Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger at the time, he talks about in the spirit of the liturgy, the proper iconographic, liturgical styles for the church, for the liturgy of the church. He skips Renaissance, actually. He has a harsh take on it because he spends most of his time in the iconographic tradition. He has high praise for the Gothic. He does skip the Renaissance altogether, and he mentions the Baroque at its best. And only that. But the bulk of the iconographic and the Gothic tradition for Pope Benedict was the essence of the liturgical imagery for the church. So what is this mode of rendition? Let me mention very briefly the teachings of St. Philip in the Orthodox Church, St. Photius I, the patriarch of Constantinople, who was patriarch right after the Second Ecumenical Council. And he was in the time, in the place where iconoclasm was happening. And even though the church declared dogmatically the veneration of images, iconoclasts were still around, so he had multiple sermons where he talks about it. In one of them, he talks about the roles of the iconography, and he mentions two. Now, building upon what the council had said, he mentions abstraction and the proper mode of rendering the image. Abstraction means for him the removal of everything that is unnecessary. Anything that just is used for to please the senses or to trigger curiosity. When I say please the senses, it's not necessarily that is bad, but there's a degree of it that could be bad that needs to be removed. It's more like asceticism in that sense. So that is abstraction. There needs to be a removal of unnecessary things. And the most interesting one is the mode that it doesn't seem to define very well, but it's like there needs to be a proper mode of rendering these mysteries. So what is that iconographic mode? That's what I'm going to try to describe here. But first, let me walk you through one thought that I've had lately, that is that we have been raised in a world where the way we see is almost certainly the way of the machine, the way a camera would look, the photorealistic way of seeing. So if I asked you, can you draw, can you paint your home? One way, in following this line of thought, would be to go to the front of the house, take a photo, and draw it and say, that's my house. That's a way of seeing it. That's fine. I'm not saying that's incorrect. There's a place for that. So it would be something like that. This is my home. You draw it, good. What I want to point to you is that already implies a whole world, a way of seeing the world. And that is, you see the world from one point only. And that's what Brunelleschi in the early Renaissance started to do. He abstracted the human experience of seeing. And he created this machine where, from a single point of view, he could see the baptistry in Florence, right? So he perfected the linear perspective. But what he's doing is looking at things from one specific point in space and from one specific moment, and focusing primarily on the external appearance of something. Is that incorrect? No, I think it has its own place. If I was like a real estate agent, probably I would want to. You know? But let me submit to you that maybe there's other ways of seeing that are not necessarily subjective or emotional. What if I ask you, what's your home in the winter and in the summer, inside and the outside? And you see it from the front and from the back. Like, is that a way that you can objectively present that to a viewer? Showing opposites, showing variance, showing the house from different angles. That is not exactly what the icon is doing, but it's something like that. It's trying to convey meaning in a more objective way. The tricky part with this question is that because of modern art, we might think of like the emotional take of the artist, how he feels in his home, and that's not the point of the icon. Also, it's more objective, matter of fact, without falling into just showing the naturalistic, the external appearance. With that in mind, we're going to walk you through this. This is something that George shares with us often. And I'm going to compare two modes of seeing with this example. So, say there's a mirror that is facing an icon. What is portrayed there gives the illusion of depth behind the picture plane. The picture plane is the board, or the canvas, or where the image is on, right? In the naturalistic style, let's say, or mode, whatever is presented to me appears as if there's a space behind. As if I had to interact with that element, I have to break into the canvas so that I can enter this world. So the pictorial space goes behind the picture plane. It's an illusion. It's what a screen is, or any screen, like this screen. They are doing that. You know? Is that incorrect? Is that bad? No, I'm not saying that. But it's a way of seeing. What the icon is doing is the reverse. And this is for me so important because when I'm painting, I'm thinking like, why did they decide to make the mountains like this, or the faces like this? Why are figures all the same size, even some are behind? What are they trying to do? So you can copy them, and then you're like, okay, I made an icon. But then when we start thinking like, what was in their minds to make this decision? Because, say, most of the mountains that we see in icons are Greek mountains. I mean, when you go to Greece, you're like, oh yeah, it looks like that, or like people. But what if I'm painting St. Patrick and I need to paint Irish mountains? I need to understand the thought process behind doing that so that I can do this. What if I'm painting mountains in Ohio? If I don't understand, I'm going to end up painting Greek mountains in Ohio. And that doesn't make sense. So, what the icon is doing is not projecting anything inward. Everything is pushed forward to the viewer. Everything that the person sees in an icon, when it's done well, and you will be the judge if I did well, but it's supposed to present everything in front of the picture plane. Nothing is hidden. Nothing, there's no illusion that you can enter another world. Why is this important? Because that's how the liturgy works. And I think this is one very important confusion that happens around icons when we say there are windows to heaven. That sounds nice, it's very poetic, but at least using this framework, it's actually the reverse. Because the window to heaven implies that we are here and heaven is there, and we have this plane through which we see God, or the saints that are not here, they're there. In the liturgy, even though some of that might still be correct, forgive my lack of theological terminology here, but we know that Christ comes and heaven becomes, the church becomes heaven, and the presence of the saints is here. And we are the body of Christ, and we were nurtured with the Eucharist. So why does this mode of seeing fit the liturgy better? Because heaven, the church becomes heaven, and we are one with heaven here and now. So the icon is projecting presence. And he does it in multiple ways. I'll show you other examples. For me, this was a revelation. For me, it was like, if I can solve other things thinking this way, I think that's where we move, not only forward, not that, but like how do we make the iconography tradition of the church incarnate in our time, here in Appalachia, in Ohio, in the United States. How do we do that? I think we have to understand what's happening. So let me show you a few examples of how this is done. One of them, and I call it this way, collapsing time and space, because that's what the icon is doing. It's of course not photographic scene. There's no exaggerated emotions as well, because that implies a single moment. Although some of that appears every now and then, and you need some of that for the relationship with the viewer, the essence of it is to show collapsing time and space. So this is an icon of the Transfiguration of Christ. This was painted by Aidan Hart. He's a very, very influential iconographer in the UK, and he's been the teacher of David Clayton, who's the director of the program, the master's program. And he's trained a lot of iconographers here in the United States as well. I want you to notice that Christ is on a mountain that is in the background, let's say. But he's bigger than Peter, that's in the foreground. And normally, in the photographic naturalistic painting, Christ would need to be smaller, right? But here, he's bigger because he's more important. It's a symbol of that. Peter is in front, but he's looking at Christ. But we see both of his eyes. If he was painted in a naturalistic way, we would be seeing his back. We wouldn't see his face. So it's as if the background and the foreground are collapsed into a single plane where they can interact with, Peter can interact, this is Peter at the bottom left, with Christ and with us. He's present to us as well. In this particular icon, you can see that there's also three Christs. Here going up the mountain and here going down the mountain. So it's three different moments in the same image because it's collapsing time as well. And it's not just because he thought, oh, I have space. In the narrative, the dialogue that happens with the apostles is regarding their crucifixion, and it relates to the transfiguration, right? In the Troparia of transfiguration, it's like it refers to the apostles receiving all as much of the light as they could hold, so they would know that when they will see him crucified, they will know that he suffered wounded. That essence of the Troparia, which is a hymn that we sing in the East for the Feast of the Transfiguration, is then manifested here in the icon and collapsing the time as well. This is not an icon, but you can see that this is in the Renaissance already. It's early 1400s. There's a lot more naturalism. You see the depth here in the trees, and you can see far away. And then this scene is Moses in the burning bush. You see the Mother of God, which is for the fathers, the burning bush is a type of the Mother of God, and Moses here taking off his sandal. Now, why do I share this? Because I think there's a remnant of that collapsing of space that lingered in the Renaissance for a while. Because he is clearly in the foreground, and this is clearly in the background. It's far away in the mountain, but she is basically the same size as Moses. Now, my take on this is that it's already on its way out of the iconographic, and there's this conflict between depth and also the flattening of the space that then was fully removed in the later period of the Renaissance. So this is just another example of that. But you can see like the sheet gets smaller, and there's a lot more treatment of depth that is then working. Another great example is the icon of the Annunciation, and where the architecture in a naturalistic way of seeing will be incorrect. In fact, in the Renaissance, and this is something George usually mentions because he's Greek, the linear perspective developed by Brunelleschi where the Renaissance painter would use was called perspectiva correcta, which is, or correct, I don't know Italian that well, but it's the correct perspective. And the iconographic one, it was called the maniera greca, the Greek way, implying that's incorrect, you know. So in that mode of thinking, these buildings are correct. But what is emphasized, at least artistically, is an encounter. So you have these towering buildings that emphasize the verticality of the figures, that they are facing each other. What are they doing? Are they describing a scene? They're providing the context of this meeting. And then, of course, if you think about it, everything happens outdoors in that house. Sometimes that's indicated with cloth that's hung on top of the buildings to say that that was indoors. But I don't know if it's that straightforward. I think it's just an indication of some privacy. In this other example from the Renaissance, this is Perugino, and this is an image that appears in the Sistine Chapel. I've seen it a couple of times, but you can see that a lot of that is being shed already. We're losing some of these patterns that we've seen from the iconographic. The whole is basically within the grid of linear perspective. The figures in their sizes decrease, in the floor, and there is very clearly indicating depth. You have not only geometric depth, let's say, but also visual color depth, because the mountains that are green on the sides are becoming blue. That's something with developing the Renaissance as well, to show even farther into the image. So, but interestingly, in this image, Christ appears 3 times. Here in the background, there's one scene with Christ, another scene with Christ here where he's about to be stoned and he slips away. So the idea of collapsing time sort of lingers for a while, but then it disappears. One other element that I want to point out here is that the halos start to disappear. Halos is something that was common to Eastern religions as well, that Christians adopted as a sign of holiness, as a disc behind the head. But besides the theological symbolic meaning, what it does visually, it flattens the image. It forces you to abstract. So iconographers, when they have let's say a group of people with halos, they need to be very creative in how they arrange them, because they all have halos that flatten them, right? In the Renaissance, that was removed, and you see that now they become like plates on top of the head, that I think start losing its meaning. They're more faint, and eventually they are fully removed, because they are thinking in this naturalistic way. Another element that is related to this is that icons are made for communion. They're always showing the faces of the figures. There's a lot that is said about, like, when somebody's showing a profile, that they are evil characters. I don't think they're necessarily evil characters when they're in profile, although sometimes they are, because animals are always in profile. It's very simple. I'm facing you, I'm talking with you, but if I'm like this, I'm not talking. So it's like a communion. So it's represented in the profile position, right? So this icon was a contemporary icon by Ekaterina and Anton Dayenko. They are Russian immigrants to the United States, and they're one of the most exciting iconographers. They're a married couple, actually. They're in Pennsylvania, and they teach at St. Tikhon's Monastery. I talked with Ekaterina for almost 2 hours over the phone, and I was deciding what program to join, and she was very generous with her time. You can see that they are fully within the iconographic tradition, but they're trying something different. I think they're very exciting. They seem to be bringing in some other motifs of late Roman painting. Here, for example, you see that Christ is much larger than the other figures, even though he's farther back, because he is the center of the icon. But you would distinguish who Judas is right away. Right here. He's in profile. Now, in this group of people, image with a group of people, they don't have halos. Now, there's reasons for that, but one of them, visually at least, is that when you have a crowd, sometimes you just do away with halos. That's fine. Halos are not essential to the icon. It's the likeness and the name and the context. The scene will always have names. as well. This is the mystical sucker. And to wrap up this whole idea of the motive which the academics made, let me just reiterate the idea of abstraction and naturalism. There's a quote that I'm skipping here. It's from Pope Pius XII in Mediator Dei. And he talks about the liturgy. He mentions these two elements so explicitly, very much like Photius the first that I mentioned initially, when he says that the necessity for abstraction and the necessity for naturalism are the right icons. The icons do that. Abstraction helps flatten the image and make it more, I think it's a good visual way to show the spiritual meaning of it. And naturalism helps just make it relatable, because we don't want to end up with a Picasso. I don't know what that is, or like a Kandinsky that is just badass. That's not, it's purely abstract. You don't want to go that way. You don't want to end up in a purely naturalistic style, because you lose a lot of the things that I'm describing. So just to point out here, like this is a typical, let's say, pretty icon in the abs of Christ. If you look at the icons, you will notice that there's a lot more emphasis put in the faces than in the garments. The garments are usually more flat. You could even see geometric shapes, entire geometric shapes in the icon, in the garments. They're like, let's say flat. I mean, that's a word that doesn't help sometimes, because you do want to render volume, but it's more abstracted. It's not that it's just like a patch of red and that's it. No, it's not that flat. You render volume in a different mode, let's say. But then if you look at the faces, there's a lot more modeling. There's a transition of color, it's more subtle. And that's where then, I would say, Angelico or Angelico and Gothic, that they mastered the extempore to make these transitions across the whole painting. Masterpieces. Typically, though, you want to have a dance between what is more abstracted and what is more naturalistic. So, with these guidelines, let's say, I keep wondering, what would iconography in the 21st century in the United States, in the Catholic Church, look like if we truly understand what icons are? I do think that the Byzantine proposal as a whole is extremely strong. It has solved as a system anything that you can think of that might be in an icon, bathrooms, faces, buildings, animals. It fits right. The question is, do we need for American Christianity, for modern Christianity, a copycat of the Byzantine paintings? I don't think so. I think we need our own language, but it needs to be nurtured by the tradition. And this is what I'm trying to convey, the mode of thinking about images. I was talking to Kevin earlier, and he asked this question exactly. So I want to just end this part by saying, like, think of the one image that is the most recognizable Roman Catholic image that follows everything that I described. It's deeply iconographic. It's unique to the Latin tradition. It's not Byzantine. It's from here. It's from North America. It was given to us and is divine. It's not made by human hands. That's our Catholic tradition. That is an icon, even when we don't think about it that way. And you can think about it theologically, there's so much scientifically that has been said. When I approach it artistically, it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece, and it ticks all the boxes. And it was a gift to us in the Catholic Church, how to paint. Probably the Lord was like, you know what, let me show you guys how to paint. He painted his model, he gave it to us. And I think, if I may venture into this, how to think forward about the art in the Catholic Church, I think we should follow this hint, if anything, in how to render our images. Anyway, I'm gonna dramatically change subjects, because how does this apply? You be the judge. I hope I put a lot of work into these icons. It's 6 months of work. This is not, the Station of the Cross is a Western tradition. I did not find many references from the Byzantine and the church that commissioned them from Iowa. They wanted them as icons. And of course, the main icons that are here from that tradition would be the crucifixion and the descent from the cross. All the other ones are not. So I had to really think about this, like how we're going to render Some of them are more straightforward. And for example, you notice that the cross is pretty small, and some of them is pretty small. Because you're not conveying the realism. Well, if it was this long and this long, and the weight of it, you're conveying the meaning. He is there. And that's the cross. You see it, and I don't know if it's something you guys thought. Probably not, because it's not important. So there's a lot of those ideas that I had to wrestle with that also helped me prepare this. Just a few notes when you walk through them. If you're not familiar with the terminology in Greek, the name for Christ that is usually put in icons appears as our IC letters, but those are Greek letters, iota, sigma, chi, and sigma, and that's the abbreviation of Jesus Christos, Jesus Christ. And when the Mother of God appears, it looks like MPOV, but those are Greek letters as well, and is the abbreviation of Mikir Theou, which is the Mother of God. That says the Mother of God. It's not a more specific term. The halo of Christ is also very unique. This ubiquitous. You see that in the West as well with the cross. That has been probably established pattern for 1,000 years with the letters. Although I didn't put them because he's turning in different directions, and sometimes the letters get a little confusing. There's one icon where he's totally face down, so the letters will have to be flipped. So I just put stars. That's also very common. The clothing of Christ is done in the typical red and blue. And I wanted to note something here, that a lot of people get caught up in the color symbolism. And there's some of that. But what sometimes that moves into is this kind of occult symbolism. Like, like another is trying to say something, at least in my investigation of the way Christ has been depicted through centuries, this red and blue is very practical. And sometimes he's portrayed in different colors. So when people sometimes approach me and say like, oh, red means this and blue means this, maybe if that helps you pray, good for you. I don't know if I would pontificate about one. I mean, you see an icon of St. Anthony. St. Anthony has the exact same colors in the exact same way. The inner garment is red, the outer garment is blue, and then you're like, so what do we do with that? So anyway, don't get caught up in that. I think a lot of the symbolism that people want to say is kind of hidden. It's just our cultural business with the time and people that made these icons. I think, I'm pretty convinced actually, when iconographers painted the icons that we see in museums, they were not hiding anything. It was just a matter of fact. That's Christ, that's it, Now for us, we need to study, like we study scripture, we need to bridge that gap. But for the ones who received it, it was pretty straightforward. And I think that's a good approach. We don't want to hide anything, we want to proclaim into the rooftops, right? So, one thing I want to point out is that this first station is here, Jesus condemned to death. One thing that I find fascinating is the image of sitting. It's a biblical image, Even in the narrative in St. John, Pilate sits to judge Christ. And that's something that I think many times is lost nowadays because we all sit all the time, and that's not something that means anything now. You just sit, you're tired, For me, I've had a reflection lately about we're moving towards, next week is the Feast of the Ascension. Now I'm giving the same talk in Iowa. And for me, the imagery that is drawn from scripture into iconography brings it home. What does it mean to sit? And Pilate is here sitting, right? The Feast of the Ascension, Christ, I've always felt like Christ leaves us. He says, I will be with you until the end of the age. And there he goes. And as a kid, I was like, weird. It's like my dad saying, I'll be with you, son, and he lives. And I'm like, you said the opposite. So what does that mean, right? A lot of the imagery that I have right now was something like this. It is beautiful. I don't think I can better that. I'll be honest. I'm not saying that. Bad. No. It has to be a place for it. But what I'm trying to say here is when you focus on let's imagine what the moment looked like. Let's imagine we had a camera and the glories coming out and the special effects. Maybe there's a point to that, but when you focus on the centricity of the moment and you lose, what does this mean? then that ripples, right? Ripples out. The icon of the Ascension is more like this. This is an icon by Michael Kabelk, who lives in Pittsburgh. I met him once, and he's a great iconographer. You see that Christ, yes, he is higher, but he's sitting. And then below you have the Lord of God in the center, and the apostles, right? Then the rest is stripped. There you have the angels, because he's going out to heaven. Why is he sitting? Why is he sitting there? He's sitting at the right hand of the Father, and when you see the icon, he is portrayed as in the vision of John. He is dressed not in red and blue, he's dressed in, what's the name of this color? It's kind of this orange, jasper, in blue, he says in John. And he's sitting on a rainbow. That's what John sees. He's enthroned. When I understood this icon, I was like, oh, okay, so he is with us until the end of the age. Just by seeing him sitting. He is like the warrior who, or the king who conquers all his enemies and then returns to the capital and he sits because he walks, he judges, and he reigns through his body, his kingdom. So he's not leaving. And like, where is he now? He went to the capital, literally, the head. He went there and sat and he reigns. And we are his kingdom. And he is here. So for me, the icon made it clear that I will be with you until the end of the age. And yes, I see it. I see it. So that was the first icon. I'm not gonna do this with all of them. Don't worry. I'm just gonna look at another one, and that is the crucifixion. There's a couple things there in the crucifixion that I wanted to point out. People ask me about this things over there, and that is the little things floating above the cross. Those are the sun and the moon. Many times when you go to the dark parts of the internet, they will say there are UFOs or there are weird things. It's just the sun and the moon crying for the Son of God who has died in the flesh. And in the narrative, of course, that has manifested the earthquake and the eclipse, and so it's the whole cosmos. Sometimes we even have the stars appear, and then, or more angels crying. Sometimes the sun and the moon are replaced with angels who are crying, because in the ancient mind, the heavenly hosts are also angels, the patterns of angels. But most importantly, at the bottom, this is something that many times it disappeared fully almost in the Western imagery when you have the scroll at the bottom of the cross. For those of you who are more familiar with iconography, maybe it doesn't strike you, but I've had some people ask me, oh, that's kind of weird. Why is there a scroll under the cross? Well, what's the name of that place? It's the Golgotha. It's the place of the scroll. So that's one. What does that mean? It's the place of the scroll. But it also, as far as I understand the Jewish tradition, that's the place where Adam died. He died outside the garden, and Christ died outside the walls of Jerusalem. He died on the same spot where Adam had died, his father. Not only that, you see that the blood of the feet of Christ fall on the scroll. What is that doing? So if you were to zoom into this little cave where the head is, what would you see? You will see this. I think that icons are hyperlinked just like the Bible is, Holy Scriptures. And you have to see the whole program. When you go, let me go back. This cave, the head of Adam that is receiving the blood of Christ, that is the fulfillment of a promise. The promise of resurrection, right? So this is the icon of the Anastasis. This is on the apse of the church. It's a monastery in Corinth in Constantinople in Turkey now. And this is a church where, for burials. It's one of those Byzantine masterpieces. Right? This is so, and then you see, for those who are not familiar with it, this is Adam and this is Eve. I don't know about the church of Eve. And Christ is pulling them out from the grave along and around him. He's surrounded by the holy ones. John the Forerunner who came, went down before him to proclaim, and then Abel and King David and so on. So, if I may, the icon of crucifixion holds within itself the hope of the resurrection, and that little detail. Because they relate to each other. And if I put next to this the icon of the baptism of the Lord, it will look very similar. He's dressed very similarly, he looks, his posture is very similar, and John the Forerunner is baptizing him. And then if I put next to this the icon of the, I should have done it actually if I'm saying it, of the Nativity of the Lord, it also has a cave with the baby Christ there, wrapped in swaddling cloths. It looks like he's dead. And you see that it's a whole pattern, it's a whole grammar, let's say. My hope would be that we could do that. We could take the tradition of the universal church in the iconography, the beauty of the iconographic tradition, and speak a new language in this style that and all of us will enjoy. And it doesn't need to be Byzantine, although it's extremely beautiful. So anyway, that's wraps up my presentation. I hope you enjoyed the icons, and well, thank you for coming. I don't know if anybody wants to ask a question. I don't know about the icons, what I said, I'll give you the best answer. If not, we can just mingle and keep looking at the icons. Yes?
I have two questions. One observation is when Christ accepts his cross in the second station, it's the only time he looks at us. And it looks like he's going, okay, what about you guys, man? Are you with me? And I just love that. And the other one, actually there's two. There's sandals throughout this, and they're not always on Christ. They actually move to John, and then they move to somebody else. Somebody taking them down from the cross, and they're like barbed wire or something. I don't know what is the symbology of that, and what was that for you?
Well, to the first question about him looking at us, when you have a scene, normally the eyes of the figures just interact with each other. Sometimes they face you. I'm actually working on one of the Hospitality of Abraham, where the three angels are there, and the central figure looks at us, and all the others also looking at him. So it's more like an artistic decision. But when you have standing figures, like in the main level of Byzantine Church, they all look at you. And that even is something that was certainly developed the most after the Second Ecumenical Council and the Iconoclasm. Before you had what is called like absolute frontality, so figures would be pretty stiff and just facing directly, right? For some reason, after the period of Iconoclasm, they started adding more movement. So figures will be what is called a contrapposto in the more Western style painting, but they will be slightly turned and the eyes will be facing the other direction. What it does in a flat image is like, when you paint that way a figure, regardless of where you stand, you feel that the figure is looking at you. When people look at the Mona Lisa, they feel like, wow, look at what they did, the Mona Lisa looking at you from every angle. That was pretty well known. That style, you can achieve that effect of presence regardless of where you stand. That's why in the Eastern tradition they prefer flat images and not statues as much. There's multiple reasons. The proximity with idolatry and all that, but one of them is that artistically it was much easier to convey presence. So you have like the whole program of the church, and you have scenes that are painted at life-size figure, you do feel that they're looking, and it's amazing. So that's what I try to do there. So I'm glad you noticed. In the sandals, they are a stylistic decision. You will see, you survey Byzantine painting throughout like multiple centuries. Their style is differently. That's how the master does it. I find it very fun because they are not like tied to the floor. They are kind of floaty and they have some movement. They could be done differently. Yeah, that's my goal. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, great. And I've got one more, I'm sorry. So in the background where he's moving along, right? It's the shape, and it looks like it's got some planks on it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
That's also a stylistic decision. It's my attempt to play with the way the Greek tradition has rendered mountains. There's a high degree of abstraction, and I talked about the need for abstraction that is done heavily in garments. The landscapes are done that way as well. And sometimes they're like, you see some icons like the rock formations. How could that be? You know? Clearly, they're just manifesting them. They're enveloping a figure, like in baptism. They're used as props for the meaning of the scene. I mean, yeah, you usually have this geometric shape on the top that is like a plane, and then it goes down and it's like a little staircase. That's how they do it. I decided to keep one at the top and then a few at the bottom. It is, again, stylistically, sort of personal decisions. Yeah.
You mentioned a desire for and a hope for the development that I assume that you consider yourself a part of, and then you referenced several of the contemporary Americans or people living in America who may not be from America, who are, you could say, part of this American iconographic tradition that's ongoing, a living iconographic tradition here. What would you point out to be maybe just a few, maybe 1, 2, 3 stylistic decisions, stylistic expressions that you would find that may be a part of that movement? Like you distinguished, like, oh, this is the Cretan school. Maybe that's the style of the painterliness, the color choices. I've seen Coptic icons typically have different proportions. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a big question. I wrestle with that a lot. There's a lot of figures out there trying very interesting things. Most famously John Bajo with all his thoughts and symbology, and the usual suspects, Hard, you have Father, what's his name, Justinian. There's so many. George Cordes himself, eventually, Ekaterina Antonia, and you can go down the list. There's a lot of them. I think that this is a larger thought. So let me take it this way. Somebody can make a great icon in something that is like a masterpiece. Good for them, good for the church. But that's not enough. What we need is a whole program. It needs to be consistent enough so that we can create not only of the church, but across time. And that's been done. Recently there was one iconographer from Romania, Grigore Popescu, who was celebrated. He's been painting for 60 years. You see his churches very consistently, very more Slavic, beautiful. You see other ones like the represented Father, I forget his name, but he plays with color so much. I think that the fruits of that will only be seen in time. But I think that in the Catholic Church, in the Orthodox Church, there hasn't been any movement outside of the Catholic. But in the Catholic Church, we have at least 3 or more, even, that approach to the liturgical. If you think about the Gothic, if you think about the Baroque, they were like a whole thrust of the spiritual development. Not only iconography, you have music. You think about the Baroque, music, architecture, painting, poetry. I think iconography should be part of that. What it should look like, I don't know. I mean, you have already a lot of people exploring different ways, different directions. We'll see, time will tell if they have children in the sense of if that endures. Because some are pushing it really hard in some directions that are like, will that have fruit? Will I have children? Will that create a whole school? I don't know. My guess is not. But we should I should pray for it too. We have something like that. It can encompass what's happening in other areas as well. You can create this cohesive. I don't know if that answers your
It does. Part of the issue is it's now. We are here not looking at something that happened a century ago.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm sure that people in the midst of the Gothic were like, well, something is happening. You know, what is this? You know, it's only after in the Renaissance that they named it with a derogative name, Gothic. You know, it's like barbaric because they were looking, or like Romanesque. You know, it was almost Roman, not quite. So they were further into the future and they would look down on it, but they were, because of the distance they were named. Now, maybe something is happening right now. And we're so close to it that we can't tell. But my hope is that there's more flexibility that I find. I mean, so Orthodox iconographers, who are the best iconographers at this point, understand this. The need for flexibility, the need for the local tradition, to inform iconography in being fully faithful to the tradition. That is being done, and that actually has happened. You have schools of iconography, like the Slavic tradition and the African traditions. It has to happen now, right? So, but I think the advantage that we might have, although we have our problems as Catholics, is we've seen that happen through history. We've seen what it takes. We've seen that, we have that flexibility. I think we just need to remember what we have forgotten. Anyway. Any other question?